Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I am here to bring you a battle between two 2018 Challenger decks. We have Second Sun Control over here and Counter Surge over there. We'll be playing the best of three and we will be sideboarding as well. We'll go ahead and roll to see who goes first. Second Sun Control gets 11. Counter Surge gets 6. Second Sun Control will opt to be on the draw, so Counter Surge will go first. Counter Surge will draw 7. They draw a Rishkar, Pima Renegade, Foul Orchard, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, Verdurous Gearhulk, Dream Stealer, Swamp, and Swamp. This is an okay first hand. Not the best, but it is not bad either. So we will keep it. Second Sun Control, draw 7. They get a Cast Out, Ipnu Rivulet, Field of Ruin, Island, Censor, Aether Meltdown, and Island. This is a bit of a slow hand, but I think we're going to keep it on the power of the Censor and potentially at some point using this Cast Out. Counter Surge will begin by playing the Foul Orchard. It enters the battlefield tapped and you can tap it for black or green. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control draws, gets an island, will play an island, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, Counter Surge draws, gets a forest, we will play a swamp, and then we will tap the Swamp and the Foul Orchard, and we will play the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. This is a 2/1 human rogue with menace. Whenever Glint Sleeve Siphoner enters the battlefield or attacks, you get 1 energy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, you draw a card and you lose a life. It enters the battlefield, so we'll get 1 energy. We'll use this to track the amount of energy that we have. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control draws. They get an opt. Second Sun Control will play another island. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. Counter Surge draws. Gets a forest. Will play the forest. Counter Surge will attack with the Glint Sleeve Siphoner for 2. And because it attacks, we're going to get 1 energy to go to 2 energy. Second Sun Control will take 2 and go to 18. Counter Surge will follow up by tapping all 3 mana and playing the Dream Stealer. This is a 1/2 human wizard with menace. Whenever Dream Stealer deals combat damage to a player, that player discards that many cards. And you can also eternalize for 4 black. In response, Second Sun Control will play Censor. It is an instant counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. And you can also cycle it for blue. Dream Stealer doesn't resolve and ends up in the graveyard. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps. They draw. We get a Plains. We'll play the Plains. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. During the upkeep, we can pay 2 energy. We will to draw a card and lose a life. We'll go down to 19. Then we'll draw a Blossoming Defense. We'll go to our draw step. We'll draw another card, which is an Aether Hub. We'll play the Aether Hub. This is a land that when it enters the battlefield, you get 1 energy. Here's our energy. And then you can tap it for colorless or tap it and pay an energy to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. We will then tap 3 mana. This for colorless to play Rishkar, Pima Renegade. This is a 2/2 legendary elf druid, and when Rishkar enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Each creature you control with the counter on it has tap, add green to your mana pool. As it enters the battlefield, we'll put counters on both the Rishkar Pima Renegade and the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, making the Glint Sleeve Siphoner a 3/2, and then we will attack with the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, which will give us 1 more energy for 3. In response to the attack, we will tap the Plains and the Island, and we'll play Aether Meltdown. This is an aura and has flash and enchant creature or vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, we get 2 energy. So we'll go ahead and mark our energy with this. And then enchanted permanent gets -4/-0. We'll enchant the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. In response, we will tap the Foul Orchard and we'll play Blossoming Defense, targeting the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, which gives it +2/+2 and a hexproof until end of turn, meaning that the Aether Meltdown can't target the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. The Aether Meltdown does not hit the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. We do not get this energy because it doesn't enter the battlefield. And then we're going to take 5 damage from the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, going to 13. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, we'll tap the island and cast Opt, which is an instant. It says scry 1, then draw a card. We'll scry. We do not need this plane, so we'll put it at the bottom. And then we draw an island. And then Counter Surge will finish passing the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Supreme Will. Second Sun Control will play the Ipnu Rivulet. This is a land. It says tap, add colorless to your mana pool, tap, pay 1 life, add blue to your mana pool, or 1 blue, tap, sacrifice the desert. Target player puts the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then before my opponent can draw with the Glintsleeve Siphoner again, we're going to spend 4 mana and cast Cast Out. This is enchantment with flash. When Cast Out enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. We will exile the Glintsleeve Siphoner. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. Counter Surge draws. We have a Winding Constrictor. We'll go ahead and play the Swamp. And then we will tap the Swamp and the Forest to play a Winding Constrictor. This is a 2/3 snake. If one or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature you control, that many of those counters plus 1 are placed on that permanent instead. And if you would get 1 or more counters, you get that many of those counters plus 1 instead. And then we'll attack Second Sun Control with the 3/3 Rishkar Pima Renegade. Second Sun Control has no way of dealing with that. We'll take 3 and go to 10. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets another island. We'll play the Field of Ruin, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, Counter Surge draws, gets a forest. We'll play the Forest. Counter Surge will tap the Aether Hub, the 2 forests and the 2 swamps to play Verdurous Gearhulk. This is a 4/4 artifact construct with trample. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. In response, Second Sun Control will tap these 3 lands here and play Supreme Will. This is an instant. You can choose 1. Counter target spell unless this controller pays 3, or look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. We will choose to counter the Verdurous Gearhulk. The Verdurous Gearhulk is countered. It goes to the graveyard. And then Counter Surge will attack with Rishkar and the Winding Constrictor for 5. Second Sun Control can't do anything about that. We'll take 5 and go to 5. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Settle the Wreckage. We'll play an island, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Verdurous Gearhulk. Counter Surge will tap 5 mana and cast another Verdurous Gearhulk, same as before. This time, Second Sun Control has no response. This means 4 counters will enter the battlefield. We'll put 1 on each of these creatures, and then perhaps an extra 1 on the Winding Constrictor. Because of the Winding Constrictor's ability, Rishkar will get 2, Winding Constrictor will get 3, and Verdurous Gearhulk will get 2. And then Counter Surge will attack with the Winding Constrictor and Rishkar Pima Renegade. In response, Second Sun Control will tap 2 islands and the Field of Ruin to use its secondary ability, which is 2 tap, sacrifice Field of Ruin, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Each player searches his or her library for a basic land, puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles his or her library. We'll sacrifice the Field of Ruin and target the Foul Orchard. The Foul Orchard is destroyed. We will search out a swamp. We'll shuffle. Second Sun Control will search out a plains. We'll put that onto the battlefield. We'll shuffle. And then Second Sun Control will tap everything and play Settle the Wreckage. This is an instant. Exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search his or her library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle his or her library. The Winding Constrictor and Rishkar are exiled. We'll search for a swamp and a forest and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. And then we'll pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets Approach of the Second Sun. We will play an island, and then we'll tap out and cast Approach of the Second Sun. It's a sorcery. If it was cast from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put it into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. we'll gain 7 life to go up to 12, and we'll put it on the top 7th. And then second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Glint Sleeve Siphoner. We'll tap 2. We'll play the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. We'll attack with Verdurous Gear Hulk for 6. Second Sun Control has to take 6. We'll go down to 6. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps. Before the draw step during the upkeep, we're going to pay a blue, and we will sacrifice the Ipnu Rivulet to take the top 4 cards and put them into the graveyard. We are putting a Plains, an Island, a Censor, and an Island into the graveyard, and then we'll draw. We draw Kefnet the Mindful. We will play the Island, and then we'll tap 3 mana, and play Kefnet the Mindful, and then we will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. During the upkeep, we'll use the Glint Sleeve Siphoner's ability to spend 2 energy to draw a card and lose a life to go to 18. Then we'll draw. We get another Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and we will attack with the Verdurous Gear Hulk and the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. This will trigger, giving us an energy. Second Sun Control is out of options. They'll take 8 and lose the game. We'll be right back for sideboarding. Alright, in sideboarding, Counter Surge is going to add 4 Duresses, and we're going to move all the targeted creature removal because my opponent doesn't have much in the way of creatures. There's still 1 Hour of Glory in the deck in case we see another Kefnet. Second Sun Control will make no changes to their deck during sideboarding. This time, Second Sun Control will choose to be on the play, and we'll get started by drawing 7 cards. Second Sun Control draws an Opt, an Aether Meltdown, Settle the Wreckage, Cast Out, Plains, and Plains. I'm still going to keep this even though we don't have any blue mana because I'm hoping that cycling the Cast Out will get us there. Counter Surge draws 7. We get a Long Tusk Cub Swamp, Blossoming Defense, Dream Stealer, Winding Constrictor, and Glint Sleeve Siphoner. 1 Swamp is not going to be good enough for this, so we will take this back and draw another 7. Counter Surge draws a Swamp, #tap Oasis, Dream Stealer, Blossoming Defense, Winding Constrictor, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and Aether Hub. I think that this is a keepable hand, so we will do so, and we will take the Blossoming Defense and stick it on the bottom. Second Sun Control will get started with the Plains, and then we'll pass the turn. Counter Surge draws, gets a Forest, Counter Surge will play the Swamp, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, Second Sun Control will tap the Plains and cycle Cast Out. We'll discard and draw another card, which is an Aether Meltdown. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets an Ipnu Rivulet. Second Sun Control will play the Ipnu Rivulet, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge draws, gets a Swamp, will play the Forest, and then Counter Surge will tap the Swamp and the Forest and will play the Winding Constrictor, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, we'll tap the Ipnu Rivulet, pay 1 life to go to 19, and then we will add blue to our mana pool and play the Opt. We'll scry, we'll look at the Opt, and we'll draw it. Second Sun Control will untap and draw, get an Island. We'll play the Island, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. Counter Surge draws, gets a Forest, we'll play the Aether Hub, and because of the Winding Constrictor, we'll actually get 2 energy counters to go up to 2, and then we will tap 2 mana and play the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and we'll get 2 more energy counters, and then we'll attack with the Winding Constrictor for 2. Second Sun Control will take 2 and go to 17. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, Second Sun Control will tap the Island and cast Opt. We'll scry. We'll take the Farm to Market and put it into our hand. We'll spend 1 more life to go to 16, tapping the new Rivulet, and then we'll cast another Opt. We'll take a look at the Aether Meltdown, and we'll put this one at the bottom of the deck, and then we'll draw. We get a Cast Out. Counter Surge's turn ends. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Plains. Second Sun Control will play the Plains, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. During the upkeep, we'll use the Glint Sleeve Siphoner's ability. We'll spend 2 energy, and we'll draw a card and lose a life. We drew a long tusk cub will lose 1 life to go to 19. Then we'll draw our regular card for the turn, which is a duress. We will play the swamp, and then we will spend 1 mana and cast Duress. It's a sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it, and the player discards that card. We have all of these options, and Counter Surge will choose to make us discard the Settle the Wreckage. Knowing that they have the farm in the hand, we will choose not to attack, but we also know that they don't have any counter spells, so we will go ahead and cast, for 3 mana, the Dream Stealer, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control draws, gets an island, will play an island, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. During upkeep, we'll spend 2 more energy to draw a card. We'll draw this Scrap Heap Scrounger, we'll lose a life to go to 18. And then we'll draw our regular card for the turn, which is a Foul Orchard. We will play a Forest. And then we will go to combat, and we will attack with the Winding Constrictor, the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and the Dream Stealer. We'll get 2 energy from the combination of the Glint Sleeve Siphoner and the Winding Constrictor's trigger. Second Sun Control will spend 2 mana and cast Aether Meltdown, targeting the Dream Stealer. As it enters the battlefield, we'll get 2 energy, and then we'll tap 3 more mana and cast Farm, targeting the Glint Sleeve Siphoner to destroy it. The Siphoner dies. We'll take 2 damage from the Winding Constrictor to go to 14. On the second main phase, we'll tap 2. We'll play the Scrap Heap Scrounger. This is a 3/2 artifact construct. It can't block. And for 1 black, exile another creature card from your graveyard, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. And then we'll spend 2 more mana and play the Long Tusk Cub. This is a 2/2 cat. Whenever it deals that combat damage to a player, you get 2 energy. You can pay 2 energy to put a +1/+1 counter on Long Tusk Cub. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Supreme Will. We'll play 1 Plains. We'll spend 4 mana and play Cast Out, targeting the Long Tusk Cub, exiling it. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Duress. Counter Surge will play the Foul Orchard, tapped. We'll play 1 Swamp and cast Duress. In response, Second Sun Control will tap the Plains and the Island and cast Aether Meltdown, targeting the Scrap Heap Scrounger. We'll get 2 more energy and make it -4/-0. Duress will hit the Supreme Will, which will go to the discard. Counter Surge sees no point in attacking with anything but the Winding Constrictor, which we will do. Second Sun Control takes 2 and goes to 12. Then Counter Surge passes the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Plains, and then we'll play the Plains, and Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Swamp. Counter Surge will play the Hashtip Oasis. This is a desert. You can tap it for colorless, tap it, pay 1 life for green, and 1 green, tap, sacrifice desert. Target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. You can only activate this anytime you can activate a sorcery. We will attack with the Winding Constrictor for 2. Second Sun Control takes 2 and goes to 10. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control draws, gets a Censor. Second Sun Control will pay 1 blue mana. Cycle the Censor, we'll draw another card. We get an Opt. Second Sun Control will tap 1 blue mana. We'll play the Opt. We'll scry, we'll take the Plains and put that at the bottom. We'll draw another card, which is a Glimmer of Genius. Then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. Counter Surge draws, gets a Swamp. Counter Surge will play a Swamp. We'll attack with the Winding Constrictor for 2. Second Sun Control takes 2 and goes to 8. We'll go ahead and pay 1 life with the Ipnu Revulet to go to 7, and pay 3 more to cast Glimmer of Genius. We'll scry 2, then draw 2 cards and get 2 energy. That takes us to 6 energy. We'll scry 2. We have a Cast Out and an Island. We'll keep the Cast Out on top. We'll put the Island on the bottom. Then we'll draw 2. We draw a Cast Out and a Fumigate. And then we will cycle the Cast Out to draw another card, which is another Fumigate. Then Counter Surge's turn will end. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Censor. We'll pay 1 blue mana to cycle this Censor. We get a Supreme Will. and then we will pass the turn to Counter Surge. Counter Surge untaps, they draw, they get Gonti, Lord of Luxury. We'll go ahead and tap 4 mana and play Gonti, Lord of Luxury. This is a 2/3 legendary Aetherborn Rogue with Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of the library in a random order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were any color of any type to cast it. We'll exile the top 4 cards of the library. We get a Field of Ruin, an Irrigated Farmland, and an Island. We can't actually cast any of these cards, so we'll just take the Irrigated Farmland and stick that face down and put these on the bottom in a random order. And then we'll attack with a Winding Constrictor for 2. Second Sun Control takes 2 and goes to 5. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, Second Sun Control will tap 3 and play Supreme Will. We'll look at the top 4 cards of our library. We get Approach of the Second Sun, Kefnet, Plains, and Irrigated Farmland. We'll take Approach and put it into our hand. We'll put the rest on the bottom in any order, and that will be Kefnet, Farmland, Plains. Then Counter Surge's turn will end. Second Sun Control will then start their next turn. Second Sun Control will untap. We'll draw. We get a Cast Out. We'll tap 7 mana and cast Approach of the Second Sun. This will get us 7 life to go back up to 12, and we will stick this 7 in the bottom. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Rishkar Pima Renegade. Counter Surge will spend 3 mana and cast Rishkar Pima Renegade. We'll split up the counters onto the Winding Constrictor and the Gonti, Lord of Luxury. That'll double the counters. So we have 2 4/4s, and then we will attack with the Winding Constrictor and Gonti, Lord of Luxury for 8. Second Sun Control will take 8 and go to 4. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Plains. We'll play the Plains. Then we'll tap all the white mana to cast Fumigate. It says, destroy all creatures, you gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. This destroys 5 creatures, so we'll gain 5 life to go back up to 9. Counter Surge loses all of their creatures. The Aether Meltdowns end up in the graveyard. And then we will spend 2 mana and tap and sacrifice the Ifnu Revulet to mill 4 cards. We mill Island, Irrigated Farmland, Glimmer of Genius, and Island. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. At the end of Second Sun Control's turn, we will spend 2 mana and use the Scrap Heap Scrounger. We'll exile the Gonti, Lord of Luxury, from our graveyard and return it to the battlefield. And then Second Sun Control's turn ends. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Swamp. Counter Surge will play the Swamp. Counter Surge will attack with the Scrap Heap Scrounger for 3. Second Sun Control takes 3 and goes to 6. Then Counter Surge will spend 6 mana and eternalize the Dream Stealer. It exiles and creates a 4/4 black zombie human wizard ability with the Dream Stealer's ability. And then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Supreme Will. Second Sun Control will spend 5 mana and cast Fumigate again, destroying the 2 creatures and getting us 2 life to go up to 8. Counter Surge loses the Scrap Heap Scrounger and the Dream Stealer is exiled. We'll use the Scrap Heap Scrounger's ability again, exiling Rishkar to return it to the battlefield. Then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Long Tusk Cub. Counter Surge will attack with the Scrap Heap Scrounger for 3. Second Sun Control takes 3 and goes to 5. Then Counter Surge will tap the Forest in the Swamp and play a Long Tusk Cub. And Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, we'll tap the Plains and we'll cycle the Cast Out to draw a card, which is Approach of the Second Sun. Then we'll untap and go into our turn. We draw. We get another Approach of the Second Sun. We will spend 7 mana, cast Approach of the Second Sun, and win the game. We'll be right back for Game 3. Game 3, Counter Surge will opt to go first. We'll draw. We get a Swamp, Foul Orchard, Swamp, Duress, Rishkar Pima Renegade, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and Long Tusked Cub. I think this is a fine start. Second Sun Control draws. Gets a Plains, Opt, Aether Meltdown Island, Supreme Will. I think this is an okay start as well. We'll keep this. Counter Surge will start with a Foul Orchard tapped, and then we'll pass the turn. Second Sun Control draws, gets to Settle the Wreckage. We'll play the island, and then we'll pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Blossoming Defense. We'll play the Swamp. We'll tap the Foul Orchard for green and the Swamp, and we'll play the Long Tusked Cub, and then we'll pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, Second Sun Control will tap the island and cast Opt. We'll scry, we'll take Kefnet the Mindful and stick him on the bottom of the deck. And we'll draw, we get a Field of Ruin. And Counter Surge's turn will end. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets an Opt. We will play another island, and then we will go ahead and get started by casting an Aether Meltdown targeting the Long Tusked Cub. We'll get 2 energy, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Dream Stealer. We'll play a Swamp, and then we'll play the Dream Stealer, which enters the battlefield, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets an island. We'll play the island. We'll tap 2 again. We'll Aether Meltdown the Dream Stealer as well, getting 2 more energy to go up to 4. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Winding Constrictor. Counter Surge will tap this for green and this for black, and we'll play the Winding Constrictor. We'll tap the Swamp and cast Duress, forcing Second Sun Control to drop their Settle the Wreckage. Settle the Wreckage is discarded. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, we'll tap the island, we'll cast another Opt. We'll take this Plains and we will stick it on the bottom of the deck. Counter Surge ends its turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets Approach of the Second Sun. We'll play the Plains, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets a Scrap Heap Scrounger. We're going to try to dodge that Supreme Will by playing a less important card right now. So we'll tap 3, and we'll cast Rishkar Pima Renegade and see if Second Sun Control will take the bait. Second Sun Control sees the potential for a big clock, and we will tap 3 and cast Supreme Will, countering that. Rishkar is countered, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets an island. We'll play the Field of Ruin, and then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps, draws, gets an Aether Hub. We'll play the Aether Hub. That'll get us 2 energy because of the Winding Constrictor. And then we'll tap 2 mana and play the Scrap Heap Scrounger as a 3/2. No response. Then we'll tap 2 and play the Glint Sleeve Siphoner. No response. And we'll get 2 energy per Winding Constrictor and Siphoner's abilities. And then we'll attack the Winding Constrictor for 2. Second Sun Control takes 2 and goes to 18. Then Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, we will tap 2 mana and sacrifice the Field of Ruin to destroy the Foul Orchard. We'll go grab a Plains and stick it onto the battlefield. We'll shuffle. The Foul Orchard goes down. We'll grab a Forest and put it onto the battlefield and shuffle. Then Counter Surge's turn ends. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets a Supreme Will. We'll play the island, and then we'll pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. We'll use the Glint Sleeve Siphoner's ability to lose 2 energy and 1 life to draw a card. We drew a Dream Stealer. Then we'll draw a card for our turn, which is a Glint Sleeve Siphoner. And then we will attack with the Siphoner, the Constrictor, and the Scrounger. We'll gain 2 more energy to go back up to 4. Second Sun Control will take 7 and go to 11. Then Counter Surge will tap 3 and we'll play the Dream Stealer. And Counter Surge will pass the turn. At the end of Counter Surge's turn, Second Sun Control will tap 3 and cast Supreme Will. We'll dig 4 cards deep, and we will take the Plains and put the rest on the bottom in this order. And then Counter Surge's turn will end. Then Second Sun Control will untap. We'll draw. We get an Ipnu Rivulet. we'll play the Ipnu Rivulet, and we'll tap everything. And we'll play Approach of the Second Sun. We'll gain 7 life to go back up to 18, and take this and put it 6 cards deep. And then Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. We'll use the ability of the Glintsleeve Siphoner to spend 2 energy and 1 life, taking us down to 18 life again to draw a card. We get an Hour of Glory, and then we will attack again with the whole team. We'll get 2 more energy to go back up to 4, and that will do 8 damage, and the Dream Stealer's ability will trigger, causing Second Sun Control to discard a card. Second Sun takes 8, goes 10. We'll discard the planes. Counter Surge will follow up by paying 2 more mana and playing another Glintsleeve Siphoner, and then Counter Surge will pass the turn. Second Sun Control untaps, draws, gets an island. Second Sun Control will pass the turn. Counter Surge untaps. We'll use both triggers of the Glintsleeve Siphoner to use all the energy and 2 life to go to 16, and we'll draw 2 cards. We drew a Hashtag Oasis and a Duress. Then we will play the Hashtag Oasis. We'll spend 1 black mana, cast Duress. Notice that they only have a land card in their hand, so we are clear to attack. We'll attack with everybody, getting us 4 energy and doing 10 damage. Second Sun Control has no recourse. We'll take the 10 damage and lose. And that is it for this battle between these two challenger decks. Counter Surge managed to get the win 2-1 as Second Sun Control faltered with drawing removal and wrath options. Let me know what your thoughts were about these games in the comments below. I do want to get better, so if you saw any other mistakes or misplays that I should be aware of in the future with these kinds of decks, let me know as well. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of these videos, hit subscribe. Next time I'll be pitting the 4 challenger decks against each other in multiplayer in the Explorers of Ixalan format. Until then, this was Refresh, and thanks for watching.